My name is Claire Evelyn Matthews. I'm 39 years old and I live in a small gray sky town on the New England coast. Westerly, Rhode Island, though most people call it the kind of place that smells like salt and old seaweed. I grew up in the very house everyone was sitting in that afternoon. A 3-story Victorian on Maple Street that had always felt too big for the four of us and yet held every small thing that mattered. Right now my life is a strange balance of rented apartments, a job at a hospice that beats rhythm into my shoulders, and the slow, awkward learning of how to be tender with myself. Emotionally, I'm raw in a way I have spent decades avoiding. I left home 20 years ago after a night I cannot fully unmake, and I've kept the distance since, convincing myself it was survival. But I returned because my mother was dead and the house, for better or worse, was the last tangible map of the life that raised me. Before I dive any further, if you're into real stories that hit deep, please consider subscribing. It's hard to be this honest out loud, but if someone out there recognizes the ache, maybe they'll feel less alone. The lawyer's office was too bright for that kind of grief. The light poured into the living room like a blind curiosity, landing on the wide, scarred dining table where we'd all been summoned. My brother Ben, who had never left town and had the permanent scowl of a man who signaled, "I will fight for this," before he knew what this was. My sister June, who had been a string of apologies since she arrived, always smoothing a place setting with hands that still waved like they were trying to put out a fire. And relatives whose faces felt like weather. We ate a silent, stiff lunch, the kind you consume because it's what the living do between funerals, when the lawyer, Mr. Hollis, cleared his throat and opened a thin folder. I remember the clink of a fork, the sound of April rain beginning to slap at the windows, and the way my own palms started sweating into the cloth napkin. The room smelled like roast chicken and lemon cake and something older. The rubbing scent of the house, dust, lemon oil, the faint sweetness of my mother's hair products. Those smells carried memory like a small animal under clothing. "Before I announce the specifics of the estate," Mr. Hollis said, "there is one thing everyone should be aware of." He folded his hands. "The deed to the house at 47 Maple Street bears the name of." I couldn't tell you why my body tightened before he finished the sentence. Maybe because of the way my throat always closes when truth is coming. Maybe because I had been taught to brace for bad weather. Someone laughed, Ben, an edge of nervousness I recognized as anger. My sister's fork paused midair. The lawyer's voice was flat and then softer, as if trying to cushion a stone. "Claire Evelyn Matthews," he said. The room made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a sob. For a handful of seconds everyone just stopped, forks suspended, salad leaves frozen in midair. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath against the pane. It was as if the world had decided on pause. I remember thinking, disbelieving, that everyone's muscles had been cut off from their hunger. People literally stopped eating. Ben's face went white. "What did you say?" he asked, and the words sounded like something trying to climb out of a too tight throat. June's hand slid down the side of her fork like she had forgotten how to let go. My aunt's eyes filled but she didn't move to wipe them. The air in the room was thick enough to be a presence. I wanted to take the folder from Mr. Hollis. I wanted to tell them there had to be a mistake, that this was some clerical error, that my mother would have called me before doing something like this. If she could, if she had the courage to call me back into the life she'd once protected me from. But the sound that came out of me was small and a little stunned. "I don't understand," I said. The sentence was an island. It didn't bridge anything. Mr. Hollis explained the basics with a professional's distance. A quitclaim deed, a transfer recorded 20 years prior, signatures notarized. He read dates that my mind looped like a skipping record. March 1998. The name matched mine exactly, including the middle name that my mother used only when she wanted me to feel seen. I had never seen the deed before. My mother had never told me she had done anything like this. She had never asked me to come home. Ben launched then, not gentle. "You signed," he demanded. "You took it from us. You took the house." His voice cracked around the accusation, and the room leaned into it like a crowd at a game. My brother's anger smelled sharp, like the lemon oil on the table, but bracing. "No," I said. My voice was small but steady. "I didn't know. She did it without telling me. Convenient, Ben said. You left. You vanished. Now you come back and you have the house. Just like that. June's face crumpled and she put her hand over her mouth. Behind her I saw our mother's armchair, the indentation where she used to sit reading the paper, the blanket she's buried under now. For a second I believed my chest would collapse into the hollow of the chair. I felt both accused and hollowly responsible, as if the ownership secretly made me guilty of something I didn't remember committing. There are different kinds of silence. This one was the lurch of a family's history tilting, the pause after a verdict. It allowed things to surface. Accusations turned into memories. The nights the house felt like a ship at sea, my father's footsteps a storm. The year groceries were thin and my mother locked herself in the kitchen and cried into a tea towel. The summer I left and the image of our porch light going out. These things hung there and made the room too heavy to breathe in. It felt obscene to eat around such freshly unearthed wounds, like spoons were instruments of denial. Why would she do that? June whispered. There was a tremor in her voice I recognized from the night our mother had made me promise not to tell. A long-ago hush that had protected something and destroyed more. I didn't know. I wanted to know. And for the first time in 20 years, I wanted to be part of whatever answer might come out of those old, creaking floorboards. If this is resonating with you so far, a like really helps us reach more people. And if you've ever had a family surprise land like a weight on your chest, share it in the comments. I'm reading everything. When the lawyer left, the house felt like an echo chamber. His shoes had made a neat foreign noise on our hardwood and then silence. Ben went outside to smoke though he doesn't smoke. It was a ritual I recognized. Men who need flame to claim control. June sat on the stair landing and let the tears fall as if she had never learned to stop them. I moved through rooms that were so saturated with our history that the wallpaper seemed to remember the way our arms had leaned against it. The first fight was verbal and sharp. Ben accused me again, this time with the old catalogue of grievances behind it. You walked out, he said. You abandoned us. You don't get to come back and take what's ours. You don't know what it's like to stay. I left because staying was killing me, I said. The words came with the taste of old metal, like the coin of my childhood memory. You think I wanted to leave. You think I wanted to go. You wanted to run, he said. You wanted freedom. That's why you took the house, because you're always collecting things you can leave behind. People ask later, friends, therapists, my boss who makes sympathetic noises, how the fight escalated so quickly. The answer is simpler than the myths we tell ourselves. It escalates because every small fracture in a family has been waiting its turn to become a canyon. Anger gives permission for old hurts to speak. We traded barbs about the night I left, the way Mama had stood in the doorway, the scent of her perfume on the collar of my coat. Ben mentioned things I had forgotten and June corrected him. Names like coward and betrayer were thrown like hot plates. At one point our cousin Marie, who had always acted as a kind of butter to our hard edges, said, "This isn't just about property. There's something else buried here." She was right. The deed was a thread that, when tugged, unraveled a tapestry of choices, and each thread showed a different shade of fear or love. The question wasn't only legal. It was moral. Did my mother think she was protecting me or stealing from us? That evening no one cooked. The kitchen sat quiet. The fridge hummed like a tired animal. I remember going to the back porch alone and standing with my hands on the railing. The ocean was a dark smear on the horizon, and the air had that iron tang that comes before a storm. I could feel every tendon in my neck tighten when I thought about the signature on the deed. My name, scripted in my mother's handwriting. I tried to imagine her hand writing it, what she must have thought. Were her fingers steady? Were her knuckles white with effort? Was she laughing or crying? I had to accept that I might never know why she chose me, or how much she had feared the man who used to come around with promises and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sleep didn't come that night. When I finally lay down in the room that used to be mine, the mattress felt like a foreign country. I had always believed that leaving was the only way to survive what we had survived. But when someone gives you back the map to the home you fled, It feels less like a gift and more like an inheritance of pain. Has something like this ever happened to you? Feel free to share in the comments. I'm reading everything and I promise you your words matter. The next morning I found an old box in the attic. One of those desperation treasures you only look for when you think you might fall apart. There were letters tied with fraying ribbon, photographs with corners chewed by time, and a slim spiral-bound notebook that smelled like lemon oil and dust. I brought it down and sat at the kitchen table with the pages spread like a confession. My mother had been a woman of small rebellions. The letters were to her sister, my aunt, written in the year before she moved the deed. In them she spoke of a man named Martin Hale, a smooth, soft-spoken contractor who had come to fix the porch and stayed to fix her up with a different kind of promise. She wrote about being frightened, about debts that bloomed like mold, about the way he would stand in the doorway and wait for her to say what he wanted. He was the storm in her sentences, the thing she hedged around. I signed the deed over to Claire. One letter read, "Because I cannot trust that this place will survive if I leave it in the name of a man who thinks everything is property. Claire left, but she is my blood. If anything happens to me, I want her to have a way back." There it was. Not absolution and not explanation. Just a line that made the whole house smell different. For the first time I understood that my mother had been trying to protect something she had failed to protect in other ways. The deed was less an act of betrayal than a hard, shuddering attempt at care. Yet the letters also revealed a more complicated truth. She had not intended to shock us into a fight. She'd been terrified of a man who had gotten closer to our accounts, to decisions. She wrote about the night Martin had raised his hand in anger and how she had planned to leave him, and then in a hand that trailed like a falling thing, "If he ever finds out the deed isn't in his name, he'll take everything." She'd been making contingency plans. Quiet, secret acts that felt like theft to some but like survival to her. When I read those words aloud in the now empty dining room, the house listened. It was as if the walls leaned in. I realized then that the past had been doing the hardest kind of labor, protecting itself by hiding. Ben didn't want to read the letters. "They are private," he said, but his voice shook. He wanted the facts that would let him be angry and right. June wanted conversation. We each needed different forms of repair. I sat there with the pages and felt something unspool inside me. A tiredness, yes, but also a small, stubborn kind of gratefulness. Somewhere in my chest a gap filled with the idea that perhaps my mother's actions had been an imperfect kind of love. The lawyer returned a week later because the bank had found a clause in an old mortgage and wanted clarification. It was the kind of bureaucratic tangle that smelled like cold paper and rubber stamps. The bank's rep looked at me with polite wariness. There were questions about responsibility and unpaid taxes, and the creeping possibility of foreclosure if we didn't act. Ownership on paper did not translate into security in practice. The house belonged to me legally, but legally also meant debts, obligations, powers I did not want and did not know how to wield. The room where we sat smelled like old coffee and a faint metallic fear. Ben's anger had grown quieter and more practical. Threats of legal teams, of buying me out. June kept looking at me with those leaking eyes, as if I might be part penitent, part saint. I felt smaller than the task. "Claire," Ben said softer now, "if you want to do the right thing, what is the right thing?" Yes. The question hung like breath in cold air. I had expected answers from law firms and ledgers. Instead I found only the blunt instrument of family history, and a decision that was less about law and more about whether I wanted to keep a house full of ghosts. Keeping or selling the house became a battleground and then a classroom. Lawyers were hired. Phone calls multiplied. Our conversations were peppered with transactional language that felt like currency hiding real cost. Equity, liens, probate. Ben wanted it appraised and divided. June wanted to keep it as a memorial. I wanted neither to become a martyr nor to be the one who profits from a death. The nights I spent on the porch bench staring at the ocean taught me something about ownership that isn't taught in law school. Holding a place doesn't mean possessing the people who orbit it. My mother's act had put a legal title in my name, but it hadn't tied my siblings' memories to me or to the paint on those walls. What it did was give me an agency I'd honed away for safety. Now it sat gleaming and dangerous in my hands. Old wounds reopened. Ben pulled out the worn ledger of things he'd kept track of, repairs he had made, nights he had stayed in the house while our mother slept poorly. He wanted reimbursement. June accused him of keeping a scorecard. Conversations became confessions. Ben admitted that he had often feared the house would be taken from us by creditors or by the man our mother had married briefly and then divorced. He confessed midnight calls to lawyers in the years before Mama died. Calls I had never known about. The narrative we had told ourselves about who had been right and who had been wrong began to blur. The center of our argument was less about bricks than about how we had loved and failed each other. I started to visit the hospice where I worked less as an escape and more for clarity. Sitting with people in the last chapters of their lives teaches you two things quickly: how thin illusions can be, and how fierce small kindness is. I began to ask myself what I couldn't bear to lose, and the answer was not the house. The house was a vessel for memory, but what I feared more was losing the possibility of repair. Could we use this absurd, painful inheritance to rebuild something I had thought impossible? One night, after a long argument that left the windows fogged with our breath, I convened the family in the living room and proposed a plan. It was messy like our family. I wanted to keep the house at least for a bit, but not as a monument or a prize. I wanted it to be shared in a way that felt honest. What if we take out a small loan to cover taxes and the immediate bills, I said. I can manage the logistics for a year, keep it maintained, and we can revisit the idea of selling or dividing after that. But I need people to come to help, to be here. I can't do it alone. Ben looked at me like I had pried the lid off a jar he had thought sealed. Why should we trust you? He asked, and underneath the accusation was a rawer question. Why should we risk being hurt again? Because I want to try, I said. Because I left and I paid for it in ways you don't have to know. The truth landed like a small stone. It didn't make us whole. It began to make us honest. The first 6 months were clumsy miracles. We fixed the porch roof together. Ben on the ladder, grumbling but careful. June inside, sorting through old cookbooks and fixing the pantry door she swore never worked. I managed the bills and the calls and the paper labyrinth. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we cried, sometimes we laughed in a kitchen so small we had to take turns. There were nights I lay awake and relived the moment the lawyer said my name, but over time the sharpness dulled and was replaced by a more complicated ache, part grief, part gratitude. Martin Hale came back into our orbit like an unwelcome memory, but we discovered others who had seen him too, neighbors who'd kept their distance while our mother tried to navigate him. We found evidence of what Mama had been protecting us from, voices that corroborated the fear that had driven her to make the deed. The discovery didn't absolve the hurt. It contextualized it. Ben learned then what I had known in the marrow. That survival sometimes looks like secrecy. We did not become a perfect family. Wounds don't vanish with a roof repaired. But we set new terms. Ben and I made an agreement. If after 2 years the taxes and repairs had not wiped us out and if we all still wanted it, we'd keep going. If not, we'd sell it and divide the proceeds in a way we could all live with. We crafted small rituals. Sunday breakfasts at the table. 1 room each to plant and care for. A night to tell stories about Mama that were not aimed at blame but at memory. We found therapists, read books, sat in silence and held each other's hands. There were nights when the anger returned like a tide. And there were nights when June and I watched old home videos and laughed until we couldn't breathe. We learned to let the house be both a repository of grief and a workshop for repair. I stayed not because I owned it, but because I wanted to be part of the effort to keep the parts of us that mattered from dissolving. In the end, ownership proved to be less of a prize and more of a responsibility I had to choose each day. The lawyer's announcement had been a jagged lightning strike that illuminated old scars and forced us to see each other. Did not fix everything. It did, however, make a room for truth. We stopped eating that day because the world shifted. We began to eat again because we had to feed something besides resentment. The possibility that families, like houses, can be repaired when people are willing to work, to listen, and to forgive in ways that are real and messy. If you're still with me, don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear how this ends for other people like us. There is no tidy lesson that erases pain, but there is one thing I keep. That ownership, legal, emotional, moral, is heavy, and that being given it is an invitation. I accepted that invitation not because I deserved it, but because I wanted to try to make something of it. If you ever inherit anything that burns in your hands, money, a house, responsibility, remember this. You can choose to hold it like a weapon or like something tender that needs care. Both are hard. One might save you,